The great black stallion threw his head back, iron-shod hooves striking sparks against the cobblestones of the stable yard. His eyes, wide with a wild and knowing panic, rolled white in the pale afternoon light. He was a creature of midnight silk and coiled steel, a horse worthy of the Duke of Ravenshaw, and he would have none of it. The man on his back, a seasoned rider, with hands as gentle as they were firm, was unseated in a violent bucking rejection that was as shocking as it was swift. He landed hard, the air driven from his lungs in a pained grunt. Gabriel, the Duke of Ravenshaw, did not move. He stood by the mounting block, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of forced calm that did nothing to loosen the knot of fury in his jaw. Beside him, his head groom, Mr. Tibbs, wrung a worn cap in his hands, his face a mask of weary frustration. That is the fifth one, Your Grace," Tibbs said, his voice low. The best men I have. The best in the county, some of them. He wannot take a soul." Gabriela's gaze remained fixed on the horse. Shadow, the name had suited him once, a silent, powerful presence at his late wife's side. Now it felt like a curse, a constant living emblem of the darkness that had fallen over his house. For a year since Eleanor's death, the horse had been a ghost, a vessel of furious grief that no one could touch, let alone ride. He trusted them all. Gabriel said the words, clipped and cold. It was a statement of fact and a condemnation. He trusted them, he had chosen them. Therefore, the horse's refusal was a personal affront, another crack in the edifice of control he had so carefully constructed around his life. Not a matter of trust, Your Grace," Tibbs ventured, risking the Duca's displeasure, Adas's, something else. "A sorrow has grieving her still. A horse can grieve as deep as a man, sometimes." Gabriel's lip curled in a faint, dismissive sneer. He dealt in ledgers and laws, in tenants and titles. He did not deal in equine sorrow. Grief was a disorder, a chaos, to be managed and put away. This horse's grief had become an unmanageable public spectacle. He was about to give the order, the one he had been resisting for months, the one that felt like another death, another failure, when a flicker of movement at the edge of the yard caught his eye. A girl. One of the stable hands he had seen but never truly noticed. She was moving not towards the men, but towards the horse, her steps slow and deliberate. She carried no rope, no bridle, no instrument of control. In her hands was only a small, soft brush. She was thin, dressed in a drab woolen skirt and a patched linen shirt, her hair the color of autumn leaves pulled back in a simple, severe knot. She was unremarkable in every way except for the quality of her stillness. As she drew near, Shadow, who had been pacing and snorting, his hide slick with sweat, suddenly stopped. He froze, his head high, his ears pricked towards her. The girl did not look at his eyes. She looked at the tense line of his neck, the trembling muscle in his powerful flank. She did not speak to the men who watched breathless. She spoke to the horse. Her voice was too low for the Duke to hear the words, a soft, crooning murmur that was less a sound and more a texture in the air. She held out the brush, not to him, but simply holding it in her palm. She took another step, then another. She did not try to touch his face. She stopped by his shoulder, a place of trust, and simply stood there humming. It was a simple, tuneless sound, a vibration of peace in the tense air. The great horse lowered his magnificent head. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a release of tension so profound it seemed to steal the breath from every man watching. He shifted his weight and leaned, just slightly, into the girlish space. She did not startle. She did not take advantage. She simply lifted the brush and began to stroke his neck, with long, slow, rhythmic movements. The horse stood perfectly still, as if he were carved from black marble. As if he had been waiting a year for this single quiet touch. Gabriel stared. The icy control he held over himself for once, completely fractured. He felt a shock of disbelief so profound. It was almost painful. His best men, his trusted experts, his own authority, all had failed. And this quiet, stable girl, with nothing but a soft brush and a softer voice, had succeeded. To understand the silence that fell over the Ravenshaw stable yard, the silence that would change everything, one had to understand the noise that had preceded it for a full year. It was not the noise of shouts or violence, but the deeper, more insistent noise of a grief that refused to be mastered. A grief that had seeped into the very stones of the great house and found its most potent expression in a defiant horse and a defiant child. And at the heart of that silence, a young woman named Verity Ashton began to brush away the sorrow. Verity had learned the language of silence long ago. She learned it in the cold, echoing halls of her childhood home after the bailiffs had come, the quiet shame of her father's ruin settling like dust on every surface. He had been a gentleman, a scholar, who loved books more than ledgers, and he had paid the price for it. Verity, his only child, had inherited his love of quiet things and a sharp, practical mind he had never possessed. After his death, with no prospects and a name that was more burden than benefit, she had sought work, not in a stuffy drawing room as a companion, but in the open air of the stables. Horses were honest. Their anxieties were plain, their pleasures simple. They did not care for bloodlines or bank accounts. They cared for a steady hand and a calm heart, and Verity had both. She found a quiet dignity in the rhythm of her work at the Duke of Ravenshaw's estate near the fashionable spa town of Harrogate. Mucking stalls, polishing tack, the smell of hay and clean leather was a life of the body, a life that kept the mind from dwelling on the past. She was good at her job, she was quiet, efficient, and she saw things. She saw the way the other grooms approached Shadow with a mixture of fear and professional pride, a desire to conquer the beast that was the Duca's obsession. They saw a challenge. Verity saw a heartbreak. She had watched from a distance for months, her heart aching for the beautiful tormented animal. He was not vicious, he was lost. His herd, his leader of one, had vanished from the world, and no one had explained it to him in a language he could understand. She also saw the girl. A child of about 10, with the Duca's dark hair but a different, more delicate cast to her features, Miss Cecily, the Duca's ward, the daughter of his late wife. Verity would see her slip out of the grand house and hide behind the water trough, her small face pale with a longing so intense it was a physical presence. She would watch Shadow for hours, her expression a devastating copy of the horse-ass own, a mixture of love, anger, and profound loss. The child was as unreachable as the stallion. Governesses came and went, their nerves shattered by the girl's silent, unblinking defiance. Verity understood. The world had tried to manage Cecilia's grief, just as it had tried to manage the horses. They offered platitudes and distractions, schedules and lessons, when all the girl and the animal needed was someone to be still with them in their sorrow. So when she saw the fifth rider thrown, when she saw the look of final cold decision forming on the Duca's face, a terrible certainty seized her. He was going to have the horse put down. He was going to sign a death warrant for a broken heart, and Verity, who had never acted out of turn in her life, who had learned to survive by being invisible, found she could not allow it. She had picked up the dandy brush, its bristles, soft from use, and walked into the center of the arena. Her heart had hammered against her ribs, not with fear of the horse, but with terror of the Duke, of his cold, assessing eyes, of the dismissal she was sure would come. But as she drew closer to Shadow, the world narrowed to the two of them, the scent of his fear, sharp and metallic, the tremor in his skin. She had emptied her mind of everything but a feeling she could project. I see you. I am not afraid of your pain. And now, standing under the Duca's stunned gaze, she felt a different kind of fear. Gabriel walked towards her, his polished boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, his height and the severity of his black riding coat creating an intimidating shadow. He was a handsome man, in a way that was more commanding then charming. His features were stark and well-defined, his eyes a piercing gray that seemed to miss nothing. He had been a man walled off by duty, long before grief had added another layer of stone. What did you do?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it held an absolute expectation of being answered. Verdia's hand stilled on the horse's neck. She kept her eyes downcast, a habit of her station. Nothing, your grace. I just quieted him." Quiet him again," he commanded. He gestured to Tibbs. Saddle him." Tibbs hesitated. Your grace, perhaps we should leave it for today. The horse is calm." "The girl? Saddle him," Gabriel repeated, his voice dropping to a level that permitted no argument. A knot of dread tightened in Veritia's stomach. He had not understood. He saw her success not as an act of communication, but as a trick, a new method of control to be tested and exploited. Two grooms, their faces grim, approached with the heavy saddle. At the sight of it, Shadow tensed, his ears flattening. The low, anxious rumble started in his chest again. "Please, your grace," Verity said the words, escaping before she could stop them. She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. You mustn't, he's not ready for that." He only just began to trust. Gabriella's eyes narrowed. No one questioned his orders, certainly not a stable girl. But there was no insolence in her face, only a desperate, earnest plea. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, a fear for the horse, not for herself. It was unexpected. He noticed the chapped skin of her hands against the horse's glossy black coat. He noticed the way she stood, her body a soft, unthreatening curve beside the animala's rigid power. He noticed her. For the first time he truly saw the girl who had been there all along, a quiet fixture in the background of his daily life. What precisely do you suggest, Missa?" He trailed off, realizing with a flicker of annoyance that he did not know her name. "Ashton, your grace." Verity Ashton. She took a small, steadying breath. Suggest patience. Time. He needs to learn that hands can be kind again. That, a human presence doesn't mean a demand. It was the most she had ever said to a person of rank in her life, and the silence that followed, stretched, thin and taut. She expected dismissal. She expected to be told she was a fool. Instead, the Duke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting from her face to the horse, then back again. A thought was taking shape in his mind, unorthodox, and yet strangely logical. All his trusted methods had failed. Perhaps it was time to trust something else. Very well, Miss Ashton," he said, his tone decisive. You have a new position. From this moment, you will work with this horse, and only this horse. You will report directly to Mr. Tibbs, but your instructions for the animal's care come from me. You will be paid double your current wage." Veritia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Tibbs looked equally stunned. The other grooms, who had been watching with resentful curiosity, now stared with open jealousy. Your grace? I don't know what to say." "There is nothing to say. You will do for him what you just did now. You will gentle him. I want him ridden by the end of the season. Is that understood?" It was a proposition, but it was phrased as an order, a cold, practical transaction. He had a problem. She appeared to be the solution. It was as simple as that. He was offering her a chance she could not afford to refuse, a promotion that would lift her from the anonymous drudgery of the stables into a position of unique, if precarious, responsibility. But as she looked past the Duque's imposing figure, she saw the small, pale face of Cecily, peeking around the corner of the stone archway. The child's eyes were fixed on her hand still resting on Shadoway's neck. And in that gaze, Verity saw not just the problem of a grieving horse, but the heart of the entire matter. The two griefs were intertwined. You could not heal one without the other. A strange courage, born of a conviction so deep it felt like truth itself, rose in her. She had his attention. For this one, brief moment, she had a measure of power. She would use it. I accept your grace. Verity, said her voice clear and steady. But I have a condition. A muscle jumped in Gabriel's jaw. A condition. From a stable girl. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Tibbs looked as if he might faint. Indeed, the Duke said, his voice dangerously soft. Verity drew herself up to her full, unimpressive height. She would not be cowed. This was too important. I will do everything in my power to gentle him, but the child is Cecilia. She must be allowed to be here with me while I work, if she chooses. Gabriel stared at her, his expression unreadable. Of all the things he had expected, it was not this. My ward has a governess and a schedule. She is not to be idling in the stables. Her mother's horse is not an idle thing, your grace, Verity countered, her voice ringing with a passion that surprised even herself. He is the last living thing that was entirely hers. The horse is grieving for her mother. So is the girl. They are suffering the same loss. They need to heal together. If you separate them, you are only deepening the wound for both. She had done it. She had spoken a truth he did not want to hear. She had presumed to know the heart of his ward, the heart of his household. She had overstepped every conceivable boundary of her station. She braced herself for the explosion, for the cold fury that would send her packing back to a world with no prospects at all. But men are slow, child, and dukes are slowest of all. And grief makes fools of the cleverest of us. Gabriel had been trying to solve the problem of his wife's death with logic and control, and it had been like trying to bottle the sea. He had treated Cecilia's grief as a childish defiance to be managed, and shadows as an anomalous rebellion to be broken. And this girl, this nobody, had just walked through the walls of his fortress and named the truth in its simplest, most undeniable form. He did not see a servant making demands. He saw an intelligence, a perception that cut straight to the heart of the matter. He saw someone who understood the landscape of sorrow he had been so desperately trying to pave over. A long, heavy silence passed. The stable yard seemed to be holding its breath. Finally, the Duke gave a single, sharp nod. Very well, Miss Ashton. Your condition is accepted. Inform Miss Cecilia's governess that her time with you is to be considered part of her education. An education, he added, a flicker of something unreadable in his gray eyes. And patience. He turned on his heel without another word and strode back towards the great house, his back ramrod straight, leaving a stunned stable yard in his wake. Verity let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her knees suddenly weak. Her hand, which had never left Shadow's neck, was trembling. The great horse nickered softly and nudged her shoulder, a quiet question. She had won. She had spoken truth to power, and power had, for once, listened. But as she saw the resentful glares of the other grooms and felt the weight of the Duque's expectations settle upon her, she knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a far more dangerous bargain. She had just been given the key to the coldest house in the county, and she was not at all sure she was prepared for the ghost she might find inside. The days that followed settled into a new, strange rhythm. Verity's world shrank to a single, spacious stall at the end of the stable block, and the small paddock behind it. This was Shadow's kingdom, and now it was hers. The other grooms kept a wide, resentful berth. She was no longer one of them. She was a horse charmer, the Duke's pet project, a subject of gossip and speculation that drifted from the haylofts to the servants' hall of the main house. Verity paid it no mind. Her focus was absolute. She did not try to ride Shadow. She did not lunge him or force him into submission. She simply existed in his space. She would arrive at dawn, her footsteps soft on the stone, and muck out his stall, her movements slow and predictable. She would talk to him constantly, a low, running commentary on the weather, the quality of the hay, the sparrows nesting in the rafters. It was the sound, not the words, that mattered. It was a promise of harmlessness. For the first 2 days, Cecily did not appear. Verity didn't press. She had made the space available. The child had to be the one to step into it. On the third morning, as Verity was grooming Shadow in the paddock, she saw her. A small figure in a dark blue dress, standing by the fence, half hidden by a climbing rose. Verity gave no sign that she had noticed. She continued her work, her brushstrokes long and soothing, her voice a low hum. She worked her way from Shadow's neck to his back and then, carefully, down his powerful legs. The horse stood like a statue, his tail giving a lazy, contented flick. After nearly an hour, a small voice piped up from the fence. He doesn't like his left ear being touched. Veritia's hand paused. Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me. She moved the brush to his right ear, which he tolerated with a soft snort. Cecily took a hesitant step away from the fence. Then another. My mother always started with his right ear. Your mother knew him best, Verity said gently. I am only just getting to know him. Perhaps you could teach me. The girl fell silent, her expression guarded. Verity did not push. She finished her grooming and turned Shadow out into the paddock with a fresh net of hay. She sat down on an overturned bucket, pulling a worn apple from her pocket and beginning to slice it with a small knife. She ate one slice and held another out on her flat palm. After a momentous hesitation, Shadow ambled over and took it with soft whiskery lips. Does he like apples? Cecily asked. Now only a few feet away. He loves them, Verity said with a small smile. She cut another slice. Would you like to give him one? Cecilia's eyes, a deep, stormy gray, so like her guardian's, darted from Verity's face to the horse. Fear and longing warred in her expression. I am not allowed. The Duke says he is too dangerous. He is not dangerous. Verity said quietly. Is sad. There is a difference. She held out the slice of apple towards the girl. He would not hurt you. It was more than just a piece of fruit. It was an invitation, a contradiction of the cold command that had governed her life for a year. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out her small hand and took the apple slice. Her fingers brushed Verite's, and her hand was as cold as a winter's stone. She walked to the horse, her movements stiff with apprehension. She held out her hand, flat, the way Verity had. Shadow lowered his head and took the apple with the same gentle care. A tiny, choked sob escaped Cecilia's lips. She snatched her hand back and stared at it, as if she had just touched a ghost. Without another word, she turned and fled back towards the house. Verity watched her go, her heart aching. It was a start. Painful, fragile beginning. This became their pattern. Cecily would appear, watch from a distance, and then, little by little, draw closer. She would offer a piece of information, a memory of her mother, a detail about the horse-alike, a precious hoarded coin. Verity accepted each one with quiet gratitude, weaving them into her work. The Duke was a frequent, silent observer. Verity would feel his presence before she saw him, a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden stillness among the other workers. He would stand at the far end of the yard, his arms crossed, his face impassive. He never interfered. He just watched. He watched as Verity taught Cecily how to mix the feed, just so. He watched as she let the girl hold the lead rope while Shadow grazed peacefully. He watched the rigid, fearful lines of his warder's body slowly begin to soften. One afternoon, a visitor arrived at the stables. A man dressed in the height of fashion, his coat perfectly tailored, his smile polished to a high gleam. He introduced himself to Mr. Tibbs as Mr. Alistair Finch, the late Duchess's cousin. I just came to see the old beast, he said, his voice oozing a practiced charm. He strolled towards Shadow's paddock, Verity and Cecily, forgotten. He's been giving Ravenshaw a devil of a time. Can't say I, surprised, always had a mean streak, that one. Eleanor, bless her heart, was the only one who could manage him. Cecily, who had been about to offer Shadow a carrot, froze. Her small face paled, and she looked at Finch with undisguised dislike. Finch noticed Verity. "And you must be the miracle worker. I've heard about the stable girl who tamed the monster." His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was a cold, calculating quality to his gaze that set Verity's teeth on edge. He is not a monster, sir," Verity said, her voice even a no. "My dear girl, I saw him nearly kill a man last year. For the child's safety, he ought to be put down," Finch said, directing his words pointedly past Verity to where he knew the Duke was standing, just inside the tack-room door. "A clean break. It is no kindness to prolong this attachment. It only prevents the girl from moving on." My mother loved him," Cecily burst out, her voice trembling with rage. Finch's expression softened into one of pitying concern. "Of course she did, my dear, and we must honor her memory, but we must also be practical. Your guardian has a great many responsibilities. This horse has become a dangerous liability." He gave Verity a confidential look. "You are a sensible girl. You must see that. You could do the Duke a great service by telling him the animal is beyond saving." The implication was clear: collude with him, and she would be rewarded. Defy him, and she would be an obstacle. My only service is to the horse and to the truth." "Mr. Finch," Verity said quietly. And the truth is he is healing." Finch's smile tightened. "But sentiment doesn't manage an estate, does it?" He bowed curtly and took his leave, his charming facade having done nothing to hide the snake beneath. That evening, as Verity was banking the straw in Shadow's stall for the night, the Duke appeared at the door. He was not in his riding clothes, but in a dark, severe suit that made him seem even more remote. "Mr. Finch believes the horse is a danger to my ward," he stated, his voice flat. "Mr. Finch," Verity replied, not pausing in her work, "is mistaken. Or, he is lying. I am not sure which is worst." Gabriel was taken aback by her bluntness. Is family. He professes to care for Cecilia's welfare. He cares for what Cicely represents," Verity said, finally, straightening up and looking at him. He looks at her and sees an inheritance. He looks at that horse and sees an obstacle." It was a bold, dangerous accusation. But Gabriel had seen the look on Finch's face too. He had seen the way Cecily had recoiled from him. And he had seen, day after day, the quiet, patient truth of Verity's work. He stepped into the stall, the clean, earthy scent of hay and horse surrounding them. Shadow, who would have once exploded at such an intrusion, merely shifted his weight and watched the Duke with calm, intelligent eyes. And what do you see, Miss Ashton?" Gabriel asked, his voice losing some of its ducal command, becoming something quieter, more curious. Verity's gaze softened as she looked at the horse. I see a heart that was broken and is slowly learning to mend. Much like your Warda's." She hesitated, then added, He only needs to know he is safe. That the people he loves will not be taken from him without explanation." The words hung in the air between them, a quiet indictment of his own failures. He had been so consumed with the duties of his grief, the funeral, the estate, the endless legalities of the wardship, that he had failed in the simple humanity of it. He had not sat with his ward and explained. He had issued orders and expected them to be obeyed. He looked at Verity, at the dusting of straw in her hair, the earnest sincerity in her wide, clear eyes. She was not afraid of him. More surprisingly, she simply spoke the truth as she saw it, with a clarity that was as refreshing as it was unsettling. He had hired her to solve a problem with a horse. He was beginning to realize the problem was much, much bigger. And she, this quiet, overlooked girl, was the only one who seemed to have any idea how to solve it. He found himself appearing in the stables at odd hours, drawn by a force he didn't care to name. He told himself he was inspecting his property, monitoring his investment, but he was watching her. He watched the way her hands were always gentle, the way she would lean her forehead against Shadow's great neck and just breathe with him. He saw the first time Cecily smiled in a year, a tiny watery flicker of a thing, when Verity allowed her to braid a ribbon into Shadow's mane. Alistair Finch became a more frequent visitor, always arriving with gifts for Cecilia. Dolls she ignored, sweets she refused, and a veneer of solicitous concern. He would watch Veritia's progress with a tight, proprietary smile, as if her success were somehow a credit to his own good judgment in identifying the problem. Verity felt his eyes on her, assessing, and a cold knot of unease would tighten in her stomach. He was a spider, spinning a web she couldn't yet see. The thaw, when it came, was heralded by a song. One late afternoon, a week before the autumn rains were due to set in, Verity was working a thick conditioning oil into Shadow's tail. Cecily sat on a hay bale nearby, unusually quiet, clutching a small silver-backed locket in her hand. He likes music," the girl said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Does he?" Verity asked, keeping her tone light. My mother, she used to sing to him." When she was brushing him, Baka, Cecilia's thumb stroked the locket over and over. It was a silly song. About a ship, on the sea. Verity stopped her work. "I don't suppose you remember how it goes." Cecily shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I try, but it gets stuck. I cannot hear it anymore." The last words were a choked sob. Verity's heart broke for her. She moved to sit on the bale beside the girl, leaving a respectable distance between them. She did not touch her. She just waited. Sometimes," Verity said, softly. A memory is like a frightened bird. If you grasp for it too tightly, it flies away. But if you sit very still and make a safe place for it, it might come and land on your shoulder." Cecily looked up at her, her small face streaked with tears and confusion. But what if it is gone forever?" No memory of love is ever gone forever," Verity said with a certainty that felt ancient and true. "It just gets lost for a while. Let us just be quiet for a moment. Let us not try to find it. Let us just listen for it." So they sat, in the dusty, golden light of the stable, the only sounds the soft stamp of a hoof and the chirping of sparrows. Verity did not look at the girl. She looked at Shadow, who was watching them both with his dark, knowing eyes. After a long silence, a tiny wavering sound emerged from Cecily. It was a fragment of a melody, just 3 notes, hummed uncertainly. Verity picked it up, humming the 3 notes back to her. Softly, Cecily added 2 more. Verity echoed them. Back and forth they went, rebuilding the forgotten song note by note, a fragile bridge between the past and the present. Finally, the whole melody was there, a simple, sweet lullaby. Cecilia's face was a study in wonder. That is it," she breathed. That is the song." From that day on, Verity hummed the tune whenever she worked. Shadow's response was immediate and profound. He would lower his head, his eyes would soften, and a deep, rumbling sigh would issue from his chest. It was the sound of remembering. It was the sound of peace. The true test came a week later. A ferocious autumn storm blew in from the north, rattling the windows of the great house and turning the stable yard into a sea of mud. The wind howled like a banshee, and the horses, trapped in their stalls, grew frantic. Their panicked whinnies and the crash of hooves against wood was a symphony of terror. Mr. Tibbs and his men were doing their best, but it was chaos. Verity, however, was a pool of calm in the storm. She went to Shadow's stall, not with a twitch or a sharp word, but with a lantern and her quiet humming. The horse was wild-eyed, his coat dark with sweat, but at the sound of her voice he began to settle. A small, drenched figure suddenly appeared at her elbow. It was Cecily, her nightgown soaked, her face pale with fear. Could it stay in there?" she whispered, gesturing toward the house. The wind sounds like screaming." Veritia's first instinct was to send her back with a groom. It was dangerous. But then she looked at the girl's terrified face and at the horse, who had grown calm at her presence. And she knew she could it all right, Verity said. making a quick decision. You can stay. But you must be very quiet and do exactly as I say. She took a dry horse blanket and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders, then sat her on a high stack of hay bales in the corner of the stall, shielded from any stray kicks. You are the keeper of the lantern, Verity told her, glowing lamp safely beside her. Your job is to keep the light steady, giving the child a purpose, a role in the drama. Worked instantly. Cecily sat up straighter, her fear receding as a sense of responsibility took its place. For hours, Verity stayed with the horse, talking to him, stroking his neck, humming the little sea shanty over and over while the storm raged outside. And Cecily, the keeper of the lantern, did not move. Eventually, the child's head began to nod, and she slumped against the hay, fast asleep. The storm began to quiet, its fury spent, and Verity, exhausted, finally allowed herself to rest, sinking down into the clean straw beside the sleeping girl. Gabriel found them there in the gray light of dawn. The storm had broken him from his study, the sound of it mirroring the tempest in his own soul. He had paced the lonely, magnificent corridors of his house all night, the silence more deafening than the wind. When the storm abated, he had been drawn, as always, to the stables. The scene that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. The stable was quiet, the air smelling of rain and wet earth. In the lantern's soft glow he saw them. Verity, asleep in the hay, her face smudged with dirt and softened by exhaustion. And Cecily, his ward, the angry, defiant ghost of his house, curled against the stable girl's side, her head resting on Verity's lap. Her face in sleep had lost its hard, guarded lines. She looked like a child again. She looked safe. He stood there for a long time, an unfamiliar ache in his chest. This was what a home should feel like. This quiet, unconscious trust. This warmth. It was something his money could not buy, his authority could not command. It had been built here, in the straw, by a girl with nothing to her name but a patient heart. He noticed the horse blanket had slipped from Cecily's shoulders. He moved forward silently, shrugging off his own heavy wool coat, the one bearing the ducal crest. He gently draped it over both of them, the fine fabric, a dark protective shield. He did not wake them. He simply stood guard, a silent, watching sentinel, as the first rays of the new day crept into the stable. A part of him that had been frozen for a year began finally to thaw. He had come to check on his horse. He realized with a jolt that shook him to his core that he had stayed for them. The quiet peace of that morning was a fragile thing, easily shattered. Alistair Finch chose his moment perfectly. 2 days later, a liveried clerk from a solicitor's office in Harrogate delivered a thick, beribboned document to the Duke. It was a formal petition to the Court of Chancery. Finch was suing for guardianship of Cecily and control of her considerable inheritance. Gabriel read the document in his study, the silence of the room pressing in on him. Finch's accusations were as clever as they were cruel. He painted a picture of a cold, neglectful guardian, a man so consumed by his own affairs that he had allowed his ward to fall into the care of an unsuitable and ignorant stable hand. He cited the incident with the storm twisting Verity's care into reckless endangerment. But the true poison was in the attached financials. Finch, using his access as a concerned relative, had obtained copies of the Estius ledgers, or rather, what looked like the Estius ledgers. Gabriel stared at the pages, a cold fury building in him. They were forgeries, brilliant and subtle ones. Debts were inflated, income was minimized, leases were shown as expired. It painted a picture of the Ravenshaw estate, teetering on the brink of financial collapse, making him appear an irresponsible steward, unfit to manage his own affairs, let alone a child's vast fortune. He has been planning this for months. His solicitor, a dry, meticulous man named Mr. D. Davies said, peering at the documents through his spectacles. These are very, very good forgeries, Your Grace. Proving them false will take time. An audit of this magnitude, it could take half a year. The hearing is in 2 weeks. Then we will ask for a delay. Gabriel said, his voice tight. Davies shook his head grimly. A Finch has framed this as a matter of a child's immediate safety. He claims the girl is in peril. The magistrate is an old traditionalist. He will not look kindly on what he perceives as a duke, allowing his ward to run wild in a stable. Finch will argue that any delay is simply a tactic to hide your insolvency. I fear they will not grant it. The trap was perfectly sprung. Finch had used Gabriela's own grief-stricken neglect against him. He had used Veritia's kindness as a weapon. By the time Gabriel could prove the financial fraud, the court might well have already transferred guardianship, and once Finch had Cecily, he would have her fortune. It would be nearly impossible to undo. The news fell like a stone over the household. The servants whispered in the corridors. Cecilia's new governess looked at Verity with open hostility. The world that had just begun to feel warm and safe was suddenly turning cold and hostile again. Verity first heard it, not from the Duke, but from the gossip of the grooms. They spoke with a kind of grim satisfaction. The stable girl had flown too high, and now she was going to be brought down and bring the whole house down with her. She found Cecily hiding in the deserted hayloft, her knees drawn up to her chest, the silver locket clutched in her fist. "A hay's going to take me away, is Natty," the girl whispered, her voice raw. "A Mr. Finch has going to send you away and sell Shadow." Verity sat down beside her, the scent of old hay and dust thick in the air. "Your guardian will not let that happen, but they say has ruined." Cecily insisted, her voice rising with panic. "Mr. Finch will tell the judge that the Duke is a bad man." A fierce, protective anger rose in Verity, an anger on behalf of the Duke, which was a startling emotion to feel. He was proud and cold, and often infuriating, but he was not a bad man. He was a man trapped by duty, trying to navigate a sorrow he didn't understand. "Your guardian is the Duke of Ravenshaw," Verity said, her voice firm with the conviction she willed the girl to feel. He is one of the most powerful men in England. But more than that, he is a good man. He let you stay with your horse. He let me try to help. Mr. Finch would have sold Shadow the first day. The Duca." He waited. He listened. She thought of the heavy wool coat she had woken up under, the one that smelled faintly of leather and winter air. He had been there. He had watched over them. She took a deep breath. She could not fight the legal battle. She knew nothing of ledgers or courts, but she would not allow Finch's poison to corrupt the one thing she had managed to heal. "Listen to me, Cecily," she said, taking the girl's small, cold hands in her own. "Men like Mr. Finch use lies as their weapon. They make you feel small and afraid. The only way to fight a lie is with the truth. No matter what happens in that courtroom, you hold the truth. You know what happened here, in this stable. You know that Shadow is not a monster. You know that you are not in danger. That is your truth. You must hold on to it and not let him frighten it out of you." Cecily looked at her, her gray eyes searching Veritia's face. Slowly she nodded. A flicker of the defiance Verity had first seen in her returned, but this time it was not angry and wild. It was focused and strong. That evening, Verity sought out the Duke. She found him in the library, a vast two-story room lined with thousands of books that seemed to mock him with their silent, useless wisdom. He was standing by the window, staring out at the darkening grounds, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. "Your Grace?" she said from the doorway. He turned. In the dim light he looked exhausted. The ducal mask had slipped, revealing the worried, overburdened man beneath. "Miss Ashton, I assume you have heard." "I have," she said. I came to tell you that I will leave, if it helps. If my presence is what he is using against you, I will go." The offer hung in the air between them. It was a genuine sacrifice, and they both knew it. For her to leave now would be to cast herself back into poverty, with her name now attached to a scandal. Gabriel looked at her plain, earnest face, and the straight, unwavering line of her shoulders. She was offering to throw herself from the sledge to save him from the wolves. A year ago he might have accepted. It would have been the practical, logical thing to do. But he was no longer the man he had been a year ago. No, he said, his voice rough. You will not Finch has mistaken an act of kindness for a weakness. He has mistaken a quiet heart for an ignorant one. He has underestimated both of us. You will not run. We will face this together. Ah. The word hung in the air. Together. I do not know what I can do, she said honestly. I know nothing of law. You know the truth, he said, echoing the very words she had spoken to Cecily. And you have a gift for making others see it. I am beginning to believe that is a more powerful thing than any law. He took a step closer, his gray eyes intense. A.E. is counting on Cecily being a frightened, incoherent child in court. He is counting on you being a dismissed, shamed servant. You will be neither. You will go to that court, and you will simply be yourself. You will tell them what you did and why. I will handle the rest. He was asking for her trust. He, the Duke, was asking her, the stable girl, to stand with him. A fragile, unspoken alliance was forged in that moment, in the silent, book-lined room, with the ghosts of the past and the threats of the future pressing in on all sides. The battle was no longer just for a childish inheritance. It was for the soul of a household. The day of the hearing was cold and gray, the sky a bruised, weeping canvas. The proceedings were held not in a public courtroom, but in a formal wood-paneled chamber, in Harrogatus Town Hall, a concession to the Duca's rank. The room was filled with sober-faced men in dark suits, lawyers, trustees, and the magistrate, Sir John Albright, a man with a face like a hawk and a reputation for unbending principle. Verity sat beside Mr. Davies, the Duca's solicitor. She wore her only good dress, a simple grey wool, mended and pressed to perfection. She had never felt so out of place in her life. The Duke and Cecily sat on the other side of the solicitor. Gabriel was a statue of cold fury, his face pale and set. Cecily was a miniature version of him, her small hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed forward. Alistair Finch was the picture of sorrowful responsibility. He spoke first, his voice rich with feigned emotion. He spoke of his love for his late cousin, Eleanor, and his solemn duty to her daughter. He detailed the Ducasse unfortunata financial state, presenting the forged ledgers with a sigh of regret. His solicitor, a slick, confident man, walked the magistrate through the numbers, each one a carefully crafted lie. Then Finch spoke of Cecilia's welfare. The child is grieving. It is true, he said, dabbing a handkerchief at his eye. But her guardian, in his own distraction, has allowed her to form a dangerous attachment to a vicious animal, the very beast that threw my dear cousin, and contributed to her decline. This was a new vicious lie. Eleanor had died of a fever, months after a minor riding accident. He has placed her under the influence of an uneducated stable hand, allowing them to hide away in the stables for hours on end. The girl is running wild. She needs structure. She needs a proper home. She needs to be removed from this environment of neglect and danger. It was a masterful performance. Sir John Albright listened, his expression grim. Verity could feel the room turning against them. The story Finch told was plausible. It preyed on every prejudice about class and propriety. Then it was the Duca's turn. Mr. Cra. Davies stood and began the painstaking work of refuting the financial claims. But it was technical and dry. He requested a full audit, but as he had predicted, Finch's lawyer argued it was a stalling tactic. Sir John seemed impatient. Your Grace, the magistrate said, addressing Gabriel directly. Let us put aside the ledgers for a moment. They will be examined in due course. What I am concerned with is the child. Mr. Finch claims you have shown a gross lack of judgment regarding her care. What say you to the charge that you have left her in the hands of a servant and in the company of a dangerous animal? Gabriel stood. He was not the cold, remote Duke now. His voice, when he spoke, was low and charged with a feeling he no longer bothered to conceal. Sir John. For the past year, my house has been in mourning. I believed, wrongly, that grief was a matter to be managed, like any other part of my estate. I was failing. My ward was lost in a silence I could not penetrate. The horse to which Mr. Finch refers was her mother's. It was like my ward, consumed by a grief I could not soothe. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Verity, the uneducated stable-handa, to whom he so dismissively refers, is Miss Verity Ashton. She did what I, with all my resources, could not. She did not manage their grief. She respected it. She sat with it. She showed my ward that it was possible to remember her mother with love, not just with pain. The only danger Cecily was in was the danger of a broken heart. Miss Ashton is healing it. It was a passionate defense, but Verity could see it was not enough. It was a duke's word against a cousiness. It was his interpretation against another. Sir John seemed to agree. He looked at his notes. The welfare of the child is paramount. I wish to hear from her. He beckoned to the girl. Miss Cecily, please approach. A hush fell over the room. Finch gave Cecily a small, encouraging smile, confident that a frightened child would confirm his narrative. Cecily stood, smoothed down her dress, and walked to stand before the magistrate's desk. She looked very small and very alone. Tell me, child, Sir John said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Are you afraid of this horse, Shadow? Cecily stood up straight, her voice as clear as a bell. No, sir, Shadow is not vicious. He is sad. He misses my mother. I miss her too. And this Miss Ashton, the magistrate continued. Mr. Finch suggests she has been a poor influence on you. This was the moment, the turning of the tide. The child, unprompted, declared her truth. Miss Verity is the only one who understood, Cecily said, her voice gaining strength. Everyone else wanted me to forget. They wanted me to stop being sad. Miss Veritia, she told me it was all right to be sad. She said a memory of love is never gone forever. She taught me how to sit with the sadness, instead of running from it. She is my friend. A. Finch made a move to stand, to object, but the Duke put a hand on his arm. A grip of iron. A. let her speak. Sir John looked at Cecily, his hawk-like eyes softening. And what of Mr. Finch? He says he wishes to care for you. Cecily turned her head and looked directly at Alistair Finch. He told Miss Verity to lie. He wanted her to say Shadow was dangerous, so the Duke would sell him. He doesn't care about Shadow. He does not care about me. He just wants my mother's money. The accusation, coming from the plain, honest mouth of a child, was devastating. The room erupted in murmurs. Finch went white with fury. This is outrageous. The girl has been coached. She is parroting the words of this manipulative servant. Kara, she is speaking the truth. Gabriel's voice cut through the noise like a whip. He stood, his eyes blazing. And I will not have her, or Miss Ashton, maligned. Cruelty seems already abundant this afternoon, Mr. Finch. I see no reason to add mine. He turned to the magistrate. Sir John, you have heard from my ward. You have heard from me. Mr. Finch sees an animal to be put down. Miss Ashton sees a heart to be mended. I trust her judgment. I trust her with my ward. I trust her with my house. She has earned that trust in a way that he gestured dismissively at Finch, could never comprehend. The magistrate looked from the furious Duke to the pale venomous face of Alistair Finch. Then his gaze settled on Verity. She had not said a word. She had simply sat there, a picture of quiet dignity. And you, Miss Ashton? Sir John asked, his voice cutting through the tension. You have been at the center of this storm. What do you say to all this? This was her moment. Verity stood slowly. She did not look at the magistrate. She did not look at the Duke. She looked directly at Alistair Finch, who stared back at her with pure hatred. She would not be small. She would not be shamed. "Oh, you say I am a servant, sir. You are correct," she said, her voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Am paid a wage for my work. But my work is to care for a living creature. My duty is to the truth of its nature. The truth is that this child and this horse are bound by a shared love and a shared loss. The truth is that you saw that love and that loss not as something to be honored, but as a weakness to be exploited for your own gain." She took a step forward, her quietness more powerful than any shout. You lost the authority to speak on their welfare the moment you treated their hearts as a commodity. You may understand ledgers and law, Mr. Finch, but you understand nothing of loyalty or of love. She finished, her heart hammering, and returned to her seat. The room was utterly still. The combination was undeniable. The child's simple, heartfelt testimony, the Duque's passionate, protective fury, and Veritia's unshakable, quiet dignity. Alistair Finch's carefully constructed narrative had crumbled to dust, exposed as the hollow, grasping thing it was. Sir John Albright looked at Finch, his face a cold mask of contempt. Mr. Finch, this court finds your petition to be without merit. In fact, it finds it to be malicious and predatory. I am dismissing it entirely. Furthermore, I am ordering a full, independent inquiry into the documents you have submitted. If they are found to be fraudulent, as I now strongly suspect, you will face charges. He banged his gavel once. This hearing is concluded. It was over. Alistair Finch sat frozen for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief, before gathering his papers and storming from the room. A man defeated, not by power, but by a truth he had fatally underestimated. The Duke let out a long, slow breath. He turned to Cecily and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "You were very brave," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Cecily launched herself into his arms, hugging him tightly around the neck. "I told the truth, just like Verity said." Gabriel held her close, then looked over her shoulder at Verity. His eyes met hers, and in their gray depths she saw a gratitude so profound it needed no words. He had won. They had won. The cold house was safe. That night, a fire roared in the hearth of the Ravenshaw library, chasing the chill from the ancient stones. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a quiet of peace, of resolution. Verity was standing before the grand, life-sized portrait of the late Duchess that hung above the mantelpiece. Eleanor was beautiful, with a warm, laughing smile and eyes that seemed to hold a gentle light. Verity had insisted the portrait remain, that the memory of the woman who had been the heart of this house should be honored, not hidden away. As she was beautiful, Verity said softly, not realizing she had spoken aloud. As she was, a voice said from behind her. She turned to see Gabriel standing there, a decanter and 2 glasses in his hand. He had shed the formal coat of the courtroom for a simpler velvet smoking jacket. He looked younger. The lines of strain around his eyes eased. Thought a celebratory brandy might be in order," he said, pouring a generous measure into each glass. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt of warmth shot through her. Thank you, Your Grace," she murmured, taking the glass. Gabriel," he said quietly. My name is Gabriel. I think we are past the point of formality. Don't you?" She looked down into her glass, her heart fluttering. Gabriel," she repeated the name, feeling foreign and yet perfectly right on her tongue. They stood in silence for a moment, sipping the fiery liquid, the firelight dancing on the thousands of leather-bound spines that lined the walls. He was the one to break the silence. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low and raw. "About everything. I thought grief was a weakness, a problem to be solved, an estate to be put back in order. Guy." He looked at the portrait of his late wife. "I failed her, and I was failing. Cecily. I was so determined to be strong, to be in control, that I became a cold." He turned to face Verity, his expression stripped of all its ducal armor. It was just a man confessing a failure. A you taught me that grief is not a battle to be won. It is a guest that must be welcomed and attended to until it is ready to leave of its own accord. You showed me that. I only did what felt right. She whispered. You did what was brave, he corrected her. And what was kind. I asked you to gentle a horse, Verity. But I think, in the end, it was I who was tamed. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking, becoming charged with an energy that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the quiet, stolen moments in the stable, the shared vigil of the storm. The united front in the courtroom, have come to rely on you. His voice dropping even lower, for more than just a horse, for more than just Cecily. When you offered to leave today, the thought of this house without you and Ite, it was intolerable. Veritia's heart was beating so fast, she felt dizzy. This was the moment she had been dreading and dreaming of. The moment he would thank her, pay her, and the fragile connection between them would dissolve back into the rigid lines of servant and master. Gabriel, she said, her voice trembling slightly. If this is just gratitude for what happened today, you mustn't. Do not say things you feel obligated to say. I do not want your gratitude if it is only a debt. He reached out and took the brandy glass from her nerveless fingers, setting it beside his own on the mantelpiece. Then he took her hands in his. Her hands were still chapped and work-roughened. His were smooth and strong. It began as gratitude, he admitted, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. I will not lie to you. But it is no longer that. Gratitude is a payment, a debt discharged. He looked into her eyes, and she saw a vulnerability there she had never imagined. This is a recognition. The first day in the stable, I saw a solution to a problem. Now, I only see you. Verity. The girl who understood silence. The woman who speaks the truth. The heart that warmed my cold house. He lifted a hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle, hesitant. I have been so alone, Verity, for so long. You walked into a house full of silence, and you filled it with peace, not with noise. With peace, tears welled in her eyes. Tears of relief, of disbelief, of a joy so profound it was painful. This was real. This was not a dream, Adonat say it if you are only grateful, she whispered again, a last, desperate defense against a hope too dazzling to bear. I am not grateful, he murmured, his face lowering to hers. I am in awe. And then he kissed her. It was not a practiced, polished kiss of a duke. It was clumsy, and honest and desperate. It was a kiss of homecoming. A kiss that tasted of brandy and firelight, and a year of unspoken sorrow, finally giving way to a new and brilliant dawn. In the quiet of the library, with the benevolent gaze of the past watching over them, the bargain was at last, and forever undone. It was replaced by something truer and infinitely more precious. 6 months later, spring had come to Ravenshaw. It was a spring not just of the earth, but of the soul. The great house, once a monument to grief, was now alive with warmth and light. Curtains were thrown back to let the sun in, fires burned brightly in the hearths, and the sound of a child's laughter often echoed in the long formal corridors. Verity, now the Duchess of Ravenshaw, walked across the lawn towards the paddocks, her hand held firmly in Cecilia's. She wore a simple dress of pale green silk, but she still felt most herself in the open air with the scent of horses and damp earth around her. Shadow trotted to the fence as they approached, his coat gleaming like polished jet in the morning sun. He was a different creature now. The wild anxiety was gone, replaced by a calm, confident strength. He lowered his head, nuzzling first Verita's outstretched hand, then Cecilia's, with a soft, rumbling affection. He wants an apple," Cecily said, giggling, as the horse nudged her pocket. "I believe you are right," Verity said, smiling. They had spent the morning riding together, Cecily on a sturdy pony and Verity on Shadow, who now moved under her with a fluid, joyful grace. They had explored the woods and meadows of the estate, a new map of happiness laid over the old landscape of sorrow. Gabriel came to join them, his long strides eating up the distance across the grass. He wrapped an arm around Veridia's waist, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her temple. He was no longer just the Duke, a man defined by his title and his duties. He was Gabriel, a man who smiled easily, whose gray eyes were no longer cold, but warm with a deep and abiding love. He looked at his wife, and at the girl who was now in every way that mattered, their daughter. He looked at the magnificent horse, a living symbol of the healing they had all found. The horse, the girl, the man, each had been trapped in their own silent prison of grief, and then she had come. Verity Ashton, the quiet stable girl who understood that some things cannot be broken but must be soothed. She had not come to replace what was lost. She had simply, patiently, made a safe home for what remained. She became the woman who stayed. Wasn't it something, the way a quiet heart could speak the loudest truth? What was your favorite moment in Verity and Gabriel's story? We love hearing from you, so please leave a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more tales of love and redemption. We'll be back soon with another story, just for you. Until then, take care.